Hi everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this video where I'm going to be telling you all about the books I read in September. Voiceover Maddie here. Just wanted to quickly jump in and say apologies for the quality of this video. The camera glitched out and so we're dealing with some quality issues in focus and also just the general quality, but thanks for sticking with me and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video telling you about all the books I've been reading. So following August, which if you've seen my August wrap up you will know was the most ridiculously good reading month, I wasn't sure how September was going to go, especially as I was on holiday for the first couple of weeks of September. And I never know how much I'm going to read on holiday. It can fluctuate to all I do is sit and read, or we're out and about all day every day and I never have a chance to touch a book. So I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised with how my reading went in September. I ended up reading 12 books throughout the month, which is pretty good. And it was a total of, yes, I'm reading off a piece of paper, 3,679 pages, which works out as roughly 306 pages per book and roughly 122, 123 pages per day. Which is huge. Very proud of that. I don't think it's going to continue, though I say that. It's a couple days into October and it's going pretty well so far. But overall, really, really good reading month again. Again, similar to August, not only was it really good in the amount I read, I also read some fantastic books. So let's get into it. I normally do my wrap-ups in the order that I've read the books, but I've decided this month that I'm going to do from worst through to best, which, like, none of these books were bad. It was a really good reading month. I enjoyed everything I read. But I've decided to do worst to best simply because I had so many phenomenal books, and there's 5 books I really, really want to talk about at the end of this video in a lot of detail. So I'm going to try and quickly go through the ones that I liked but didn't love, so that I get a chance to really recommend to you some of the best books I've read this year. So starting off actually with the first book I read in the month is Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. This is a literary fiction story following a woman who is basically trying to find herself. She's queer and ends up getting involved with a polyamorous / open relationship, and it all gets a bit messy from there. There is a load of discussions in this about femininity, sexuality, what makes you feel good and whether you feel okay about the fact that that makes you feel good, and how complicated things like kink can be. And it's really, really interesting. And there was also a really fascinating discussion of when there's accusations against someone, but it's someone you know and you trust and you've had a different experience, how does that make you feel? What do you do in that situation? This is such a bizarre book because there's a lot of feeling you get when you're reading it that implies like this person's being mistreated or they shouldn't do that, whatever it may be. But it's an adult who has autonomy, and are they being manipulated or are they not? It's hard to tell because it's from their perspective, and so you can see it from an outside perspective and you can see it from theirs where they're happy, and very interesting. It was enjoyable. It hasn't stuck with me how I expected it to. I didn't absolutely love it. I found it a little bit slow at times and a little bit challenging to read. And again, I really enjoyed a lot of the discussions it had, but I do sometimes feel like I would have wanted them to go a little bit further than they did. But overall, fantastic read. Glad I read it. I will also say I will link down below the vlogs in which I read all of these books. I think I vlogged almost all of them throughout the month, so I'll link those down below and list in each video which books I read in each, so you can go and watch those to see my thoughts as I'm reading them if it interests you. But next up we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was good. It was fun, it was cozy, I had a fun time reading it. That's kind of the long and short of it. This is, as everyone says, it's high fantasy, low stakes. This is following an orc, which is the character here, who retires from the life of being a mercenary and decides to open up a coffee shop and live a quiet life in a small town. And they make some good friends and they form a community, and there's a little bit of a plot and an antagonist going on as well, but the main point is just them learning to live a slower, happier life, and that's what they want. So it was really cozy and really lovely, good way to get into the autumn season, but didn't have any particular weight to it, which is something that I normally really enjoy in a book. Hence this coming out at like a 3.5 star for me. Next up is a book I don't actually currently have with me because I've lent it to my mother, and that is Charming Young Man by Elliot Schrafer, who is also the author of Darkness Outside Us. This was such good fun. I really enjoyed this. This is an arc that was sent to me by Harper 360, so thank you again to them for sending that to me. And oh my god, it's so fun. This is a queer YA historical fiction following Leon, who is trying to be up and coming in French society in the 1800s. It is such good fun. It is wholesome. It is also quite sad at times. There's a lot of interpersonal relationships. You get quite a good feel for that time period. And the author is very clear in saying you see a lot of historical figures in this book, and they are quite prominent characters, quite a lot of them, but much poetic license is required. This is not exactly who they were, exactly what their lives were, etc., etc. It's very much fiction, but I really enjoyed reading it, and as I mentioned, I've lent it to my mum. That is because she loves things like Proust and Zola and that era of history a lot and reads a lot from it. So this was like my version. And I was like, oh, look at that, a queer musician. And a fun, easy story, but it was fun to experience some of that era of time that I know very little about and see references to things that I've heard her talk about a lot in a much more digestible format. So lots of fun, highly recommend it. Next, we had a very anticipated release, which was The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. I was lucky enough to get an arc of this, so thank you again to Titan for sending me this. I did really enjoy this. I like Dark Shade of Magic. I reread that trilogy before reading this book. Again, all of those videos will be linked below. And I did like this. I say in the video where I read it, the first 200 pages, phenomenal, so interesting, so much is kicking off, can't wait. Final 200 pages, lots happening, really interesting, getting really invested in it. Middle 200? You get like 7 years of backstory in one go. And I'm not really sure why it was structured that way. I appreciate that it hooked me in quickly. I do think if that backstory had been right at the beginning, I probably would have been a bit, not bored, but like, okay, what are we getting to here? But also doing it in the middle really disrupted the flow of the book. It was really good. I adore the main character in this. Tess, is it Tess? My brain is broken. Yes, Tess, who is our new protagonist for this new trilogy by V.E. Schwab. And she was fantastic and I loved her plot, and I'm so excited to see how this series continues. Obviously that is a long way off, but I am absolutely hyped for it because Lila and Kel, Rai and Alucard, and now Tess, fantastic group, and I think it's going to make for a really, really strong trilogy, although the first one had not necessarily the best pacing I've ever read in a book. Next up, we have possibly one of the more disappointing books of this month, just because I wanted to love it so much, and that is When Women Were Dragons. I still don't know how I'm rating this book, hence it being very much in the middle of the pack, because I loved the ending. The last 100 and so pages, so good. But it took a long time to get going. I said this in the vlog when I was reading it. It was really slow at the start. Like the verse like 50, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. We're seeing like the 50s and lots of detail and what's it like for the children in this era. Ooh, so interesting. And then we just kept seeing that with nothing else for like another 200 pages. And I was like, where's the plot? What's the plan here? What are we gonna do? And then we all of a sudden got all of that right at the end, which was great, and I really enjoyed it. And like I almost cried at the end of this book. It hit me really hard. It was really, really gorgeous. It had a ton of impact. And you know, there's always the argument of it wouldn't have had that impact if the book wasn't written how it was, which is probably true, but I did struggle to get into this, and there's a lot of things in this book that aren't talked about, because that's the plot. It's like no one talks about these things, but it was a bit frustrating as a reader because I was like, I get that you guys don't want to talk about this, but can I be the omnipotent, like, can we have an omnipotent narrator that's telling me about it? I'm allowed to know more than you know, because that's sometimes how narrative works, and I guess it was a choice. You're meant to feel what this character's feeling, and so you don't know more than them, but I struggled with it, I have to say. Next up, I'm not going to try and separate these out because I'm always rubbish at it. We have Spy Family Volume 1 and 2. I never know volume to volume which ones I enjoy more, I'm useless. But the first two volumes are Spy Family, which is a manga series following this main character who is a spy, and for his latest mission he needs to have the semblance of a family. So he recruits a girl from an orphanage who he just adopts and finds a wife. The funny thing is, this girl is telepathic, so she knows that he is a spy, even though he is pretending not to be. And she also knows that her mum is an assassin. Chaos ensues. It's great fun. It's really adorable family dynamics with big fight scenes and this little girl being a bit terrified of everything around her but trying to please everyone. And honestly, it's a great time, and I'm very, very excited to continue this, and I'm glad I finally read these because I've had them for a long time and a lot of my friends really, really enjoy them, and it's taken me far, far too long to pick them up. So very happy to have finally done so. So with all of those out of the way, which I say again, were all very enjoyable reads, I am quite astonished I had nothing below like a 3.5 this month, which is really good. But I now need to talk about my 5 favourites. And these are in an order, but the order is questionable because I want to put all of them at the top. So we're just gonna have to go with it and know that these are all like within a millimetre of each other. So I don't actually know which of these is my favourite. But let's just start with Vicky, Romeo plus Jules. This is a contemporary / historical story. So this was contemporary when it was written in 2001, but it wasn't published until 2016, I think. And in that time, the author made the choice to leave it as it was written in 2001, reflecting 2001, even though that is not reflective of how society has progressed in that time. So by the time it was published, it's kind of historical, but it was like the vibe of it is contemporary fiction. It's not historical in the sense of like centuries ago. But this follows Vicky Romeo, who's the character here, who is a queer woman in Glasgow in 2001 and is quite comfortable in her queerness and very involved with the scene. And she meets Juliet here, who she gets involved with, but Jules is much newer to this and isn't involved in the scene. And there is so many interesting conversations in here. The plot revolves a little bit around them being in a production of the importance of being earnest, an all-female production of that, which is quite good fun. And honestly, the commentary on the queer scene and being queer at this time was just so fascinating and actually really eye-opening. This is one I would absolutely recommend to younger people, as in like my age, minus 5 years, like 20s. Like I wouldn't recommend this to super young teens because it's explicit at times, but I think it's a really good reminder that what we have today it's so recent, and it's very easy to look back on the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and be like, yeah, of course queerness wasn't accepted then. But then you look back at 2001, like 20 years ago, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, there was still loads of issues and that was so recent. Like, that's within my lifetime. It's crazy. But it's always a good reminder reading books like this. The one thing I will say, and the author says this at the beginning, there's an author's note at the beginning of this, which please read it if you're reading this book. There is a lot of language in this book which is very outdated and could be taken as offensive. The author, along with choosing to keep it as representative of 2001, left that in very intentionally because that was language that was used on the scene at the time and beliefs that were held in the scene at the time. It is not the author's beliefs now, it is not reflective of society now and the queer scene now, so just go in knowing that, but be aware of it in case it's something that would upset you. Next up, another slightly queer book, Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. This was such a surprise to me. This was entirely, like, I want to say a cover buy. I saw this in foils like 3 times, and every time I saw it, I was like, that's not a me kind of book. I'm good. And then once, I was just like, but what is it? Because I keep saying it's not a me kind of book just by looking at the cover, so what is it? And I remember reading the blurb and just instantly was like, oh, okay, I need that book. I was correct, I did need this book. So this follows a young woman, I think she's 22, who is from Australia, comes over to the UK to teach in an elite boarding school, all-girls boarding school, which is a little bit weird, a little bit culty, but for anyone that was educated in an all-girls school, and having gone to an all-girls private school myself, oh my god, this felt quite accurate. Just that slightly bitchy, slightly teasing, everything you say could be taken in a way that will then make fun of you, and you're quite nervous to say anything, therefore, kind of vibe, was portrayed so well in this. But as I say, it's following this young woman who's come over to teach, work as a like substitute teacher kind of vibe, and she feels really out of place. She's butch, she's lesbian, and being surrounded by these young teenage girls that will kind of rinse you for anything is quite intimidating, and she feels really, really out of place in herself and in her identity. And she meets Mrs. S, who is the headmaster's wife, and they end up having an affair, and it's gorgeous. It is so unbelievably well written. It's got a very interesting writing style, like none of the characters have names at all. Mrs. S is the only name that we get. other than that, there are no names. Everyone's referred to by like their job title or who they are in reference to our main character, which is really interesting. There's not speech marks, there's not even like a new line for speech, it's all just in the paragraphs. I don't even know, but it was so interesting, and I think it portrayed itself really well, and it was heartbreaking at the end. And there were some quotes throughout this of the main character talking about being butch, or potentially even hinting at non-binary transmasculine kind of vibes, and the way explaining it just doesn't work to people that don't get it sometimes and such. It was so interesting, so gorgeously written. I loved it. Highly recommend. Next up we have a book which I never in a million years would have thought would be making it to your favourites list. I thought this might be an okay read, but I never thought it would be this good. And that is The Deep Sky by Yume Kitase. This is a sci-fi thriller. So in this you are following, I can't remember the main character's name. What's her name? Asuka. And Asuka is one of, I think, 80-ish women or female people, they're not all women, that were selected to go on this mission, which is a one-way mission to colonize a new planet, basically, to make the human race have somewhere new to survive. And the people for this were selected, I think, at like age 12, and then competed for many, many, many years, all the way through to their 20s, to decide who was going to go on this mission. And so you see a combination of them on this mission and back in like the school setting, the academy setting, where they are learning and competing, because it starts with hundreds and they get culled down to these 80 across the span of many, many years. And you see the stresses that come along with that, as it's, again, people from all over the world, so different cultures all coming together. Super interesting. But the kind of plot of this is, on the mission, something happens and one of the crew dies, and they basically have to launch an investigation to work out, was it intentional, who is behind it, what is going on. And you've got, 80 people in deep space trapped together, completely forced proximity, and possibly one of them is trying to kill others. And it's so interesting, tensions run so high, gorgeous, loved, queer, great. I don't know what else to say. Just not something I thought I would love, but is fantastic and so gorgeously written as well. The penultimate book I'm going to be talking about was a reread for me, and that is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal Lamotta. This book. So, as I said, this book is a reread. I have read this book before. When I first read it, I think I gave it like 3 stars. I was like, it's confusing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I enjoyed that. Oh, I was so wrong. This is beautiful. The writing is exquisite. Just everything about it is incredible. Is it a bit confusing? Yes. Is that kind of half the point? Also yes. So in this, you are following Red and Blue, who are 2 individuals from warring timelines, warring worlds. And basically both of them work for institutions that are trying to go back in time and make changes that will result in the world ending up where they want it. So for anyone that's watched any kind of time travel show, read any kind of time travel story, you will know that the concept of one thing changes hundreds of years ago and it creates an entirely different world many years down the line. These 2 are basically responsible for going back, making those changes intentionally to steer the world in a certain direction. The 2 institutions want very different things. So they're basically warring against each other and having to undo the changes the others make. And at the beginning of this book, one of these individuals leaves a letter for the other, and they start up a chain of communication, and they talk to each other, and obviously are very worried about their institutions finding out, and it blossoms into a romance. And it is just beautiful. There is time travel stuff in it. You see some interesting worlds and some interesting things, and like you hear a bit about some of the changes they're trying to make, but that's not really the point. Don't get too hung up on understanding the time travel, because it's 100 and something pages, 200 pages. You're not going to understand every change they're making and the impact that is going to have hundreds of years down the line. And you're not meant to. You don't really know what worlds these 2 are trying to get to. But the writing and the just lyrical nature of this book, and the letters between the 2 of them, and the romance that blossoms in 200 pages is stunning. This is 5 stars. This is like a new favourite book. I was wrong when I first read this, and this is why I gave it another go, because I knew I read it when I was quite a lot younger, and I was still in my era of reading a lot of YA fantasy, where it's, beginning, middle, end, here is your plot. And I wasn't used to slightly weirder stuff then, and now I eat it up. So fantastic. And if you are one of the people that read it when you were like 18 and you found it a bit much, try it again, because you might be pleasantly surprised. And the final book I'm going to be talking about in this video is A Shot in the Dark by Victoria Lee. We all know I am, conveniently have it right here, the biggest Victoria Lee stan. The Fever King is incredible. This duology is one of the best things ever. That's not what I'm talking about here, but as a side note, please go read this if you haven't. And so of course, when Victoria Lee was writing a queer romance, we knew I needed it, and very luckily I was sent this by the publisher, so thank you to Piatkus for sending this to me. I am very appreciative, and this was the perfect thing to come home to my holiday and find on my doorstep. This follows Ellie, Eli, I still don't know how it's said, I'm going to assume it's Ellie, who is an art student, and she's going to this new program, photography student, and she's really excited to work with this really famous reclusive photographer called Wyatt. And on a night out, in her first day back in New York, she lived there when she was younger and she's been away for a while, she has a night out and gets with this guy who she just finds utterly compelling and really, really likes him, and they have a fantastic night together. And then, you know, first day of school, she walks into the lecture theatre, and who is at the front is this reclusive photographer, I wonder. Yeah, it would be the guy she's just slept with. Honestly, immaculate vibes. I love a setting like that. I think it's so fun, and this was done really believably as well, which was really enjoyable. And then you get into all the conversations of, can he be her teacher? Is that appropriate? And the two of them bond over shared experiences with addiction and also being ousted by their communities due to being queer. So Ellie was an Orthodox Jew and felt ostracised when she came out as queer, and also when she had drug problems and addiction problems. And Wyatt is trans and was in the military and came from a very military background and family, so again felt very ostracised when he came out. It's a gorgeous romance. It deals with so much. It is not the most lighthearted, but it leaves you with the most unreal sense of hope, and I could not recommend it more highly. It is gorgeous. I love it. As ever, Victoria Lee knocked it out of the park. So these are the 5 books you need to go away and read. Thank you very much. But as I said, overall, it was just like a phenomenal reading month. I had such a good time with it, trying to get all the books together, and I'm impressed with how much I read, given everything I had going on. So, big stack, big success. That is it for the video. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down in the comments. Let me know what your favourite book that you read in September was, and leave a book stack emoji to celebrate all of the many books we've all read in the last month. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more from me. I'll see you again in the next video in a few days' time, but bye, I'll see you in the next one.